Welcome to EduRev.
Hello, my name is Harshmeet Singh and I have been teaching Indian Polity to UPSC Civil Services aspirants over the last 5 years now. In this video, I will be taking you through two very important acts that were introduced by the British for India for our own constitutional development. If you have seen the earlier two videos, we had discussed the 1773 Regulating Act, the acts that came up after that till the time of the Great Indian Mutiny that took place in 1857. In this part, we will go ahead and see what happened after the mutiny, what were the different types of laws that were introduced and how it changed India. So in this part, we will be discussing 1858 Act, the 1861 Act, 1892 Act and the very important 1909 Act. So let's begin. Straight after the 1857 Act, जो पहला act हम लोग का आया, that was the 1858 Act called the Government of India Act 1858. Now remember, before 1857, revolt से पहले जो भी acts आई थी, those are called the Charter Act, and the acts that came up after 1857 were called the Government of India Act. Now, in this act, the rule of the company ended officially. The British government now took over India's charge and the East India Company was liquidated. As you can see, it provided for liquidation of the East India Company and the powers were transferred to the British Parliament. The British Parliament, the British government was now making all the decisions for India. So it was a British crown now that was happening, that was handling everything on behalf of India. Now, you might also say that this was just a formality because even before this, as we have seen in different acts, the power was actually in the hands of the British Parliament and the British Crown only. It was just an formal transfer of power. So that in India, people who hate the company can now be taken as or can now be told that now the company's rule is over. वो लोग चले गए, गद्दे लोग चले गए, अब British monarch आप पे rule करेंगे जो कि अच्छे के लिए rule करेंगे. So it was kind of an whitewash or an eyewash, as you can say. Then the 1857 revolt happened due to various reasons. उसमें से जो सबसे बड़ा reason था जिसकी वजह से 1857 revolt happened and why Awadh was against the British, why Rani Lakshmi Bai was against the British was because of the doctrine of lapse. Doctrine of lapse जो modern history में पढ़ते हैं, under which if the king does not have his own real son, उनकी जो property है that would be taken away by the British. The doctrine of lapse was withdrawn. It was now taken away and Indian rulers were assured by the British कि अब हम लोग interfere नहीं करेंगे. आपको जैसे काम करना है करो. But again, that was just on paper because in reality, even then, when the Indian kings or Indian rulers had to take any decision, उनको Britain से पूछना ही पड़ता था. But again, that was just on paper. Then, अब the Governor General of India would now be called the Viceroy of India. Again, just a change on paper. Viceroy means a messenger or the representative of the monarch. So अब बोला गया कि क्योंकि monarch rule कर रहा है भाई इंडिया के ऊपर, so the representative of the monarchy would be the viceroy. So अब इंडिया में जो head करेंगे that would be the viceroy. Now the system was something like this. At the top was the crown. To help the crown, there was a position now introduced called Secretary of State for India. This person was one of the cabinet ministers of UK. जो UK government थी, जैसे हमारे cabinet ministers होते हैं, एक्सटर्नल मिनिस्टर, होम मिनिस्टर, ऐसे ही यूके कैबिनेट में एक मिनिस्टर को रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी दी गई थी. दैट मिनिस्टर वाज कॉल्ड सेक्रेटरी ऑफ स्टेट फॉर इंडिया. ये क्राउन को एडवाइस करते थे अबाउट इंडियाज मैटर्स. दीज वर इन इंग्लैंड. इन इंडिया देन देयर वाज अ वाइसरॉय जो कि गवर्नर जनरल ही थे, उनको वाइसरॉय बोल दिया गया था. द फर्स्ट वाइसरॉय ऑफ इंडिया वाज लॉर्ड कैनिंग. ही वाज द वन जो कि यहाँ पे थे जब रिवोल्ट हुआ था. Also, this Secretary of State for India will be assisted by a team of 15 people, जिनको बोला जाएगा Council of India. So, Council of India नाम से 15 people would be appointed. ये भी इंग्लैंड में ही होंगे. So, this Council of India would be of 15 people. 8 of these people will be appointed by the Crown. So, 8 Crown directly appoint करेगा. बाकी 7 कहाँ से आएंगे? वो कंपनी के ही जो पुराने representatives थे, उनको चुन करके ले आएंगे. Now these 15 people along with Secretary of State for India ये क्राउन को एडवाइस करेंगे क्या करना है, और इंडिया में जो हेड होंगे उनको वाइसरॉय बोला जाएगा. So that was the system that was now being taken care of. इसके अलावा the concept of board of control had ended. अब कोई board of control नहीं होगा, कुछ नहीं होगा. When was the board of control set up? Try to remind yourself. It was in 1784 Pitt's India Act. बोर्ड ऑफ कंट्रोल को खत्म कर दिया गया था. लॉर्ड स्टैनले वाज द फर्स्ट सेक्रेटरी ऑफ स्टेट फॉर इंडिया. सो जो पहले सेक्रेटरी ऑफ स्टेट फॉर इंडिया थे वो थे लॉर्ड स्टैनले. हु वाज लॉर्ड स्टैनले? स्टैनले वाज अर्लियर द प्रेसिडेंट ऑफ द बोर्ड ऑफ कंट्रोल. सो ये बोर्ड ऑफ कंट्रोल के प्रेसिडेंट थे, और जब बोर्ड ऑफ कंट्रोल को खत्म कर दिया गया, ही वाज गिवन द न्यू पोजीशन. ही वाज मेड द फर्स्ट सेक्रेटरी ऑफ स्टेट फॉर इंडिया. Just 3 years later came the Indian Council Act of 1861. Very, very important act. यहाँ से कुछ questions आते हैं which you have to remember. First, now the Executive Council of the Viceroy or the Governor General was given a 5th member. Let me just remind you again. In 1773 4 members की Executive Council सेटअप की गई थी. 1784 में उसको 3 member कर दिया गया था. 1833 में फिर 4th member वापस आ गया था, और 1861 में 5th member was added. He was a finance member. As I discussed earlier, this was the Executive Council, not the law making. ये law making नहीं कर रहे थे. They were just the executing council. So they were making the policies, executing laws. For legislative purposes के लिए 6 to 12 more members were now added to the central executive. 6 to 12 और members आ गए थे. If you remember in the 1853 Act we had discussed how Legislative Council had 12 members, 12 लोग मिलकर law बनाते थे. Now 6 to 12 were added even more. इनमें से 3 Indians were nominated by Lord Canning in 1862. क्यों Indians को खुश करने के लिए कि देखो अब हम Indians को भी लेकर के आ रहे हैं law making में. But the reality was something very different. As you can see, ये 3 लोग कौन थे? राजा ऑफ बनारस, महाराजा ऑफ पटियाला एंड सर दिनकर राव. These people were close to the British, जो कि इंडियन से क्लोज नहीं थे. So the Indian common people still did not have any representation. वो नाम के Indians को बुला दिया गया था कि आप भी आइए legislative assembly में, you can take part in law making, but the real power was still with the British only. The 1861 Act also started the portfolio system. Portfolio system, for example, as we have today, one minister is responsible for his or her ministry or department. For example, Amit Shah is responsible for Home Ministry. Then we have S. Jaishankar जो कि responsible है external ministry के लिए. We have defense minister which is separate, finance minister which is separate. ऐसा नहीं कि सब लोग मिलकर सब कुछ संभाल रहे हैं. This is called a portfolio system. So जो executive council थी viceroy की, the 5 members, अब उन सबको अपने अपने portfolio दे दिए गए थे कि आप ये संभालेंगे, आप ये संभालेंगे, आप ये संभालेंगे, और गवर्नर जनरल या फिर viceroy इनको बोलते हैं, that would be at the top of it. Then the process of decentralization had also begun. If you remember 1833 Act में we have read कि because government of India had been formed, मद्रास और बॉम्बे से उसकी लॉ मेकिंग पावर्स ले ली गई थी. मद्रास एंड बॉम्बे could not make laws after 1833. The British thought कि जो 1857 का रिवोल्ट हुआ, one of the reasons why revolt happened was because of this, that the power was centralized. केवल एक सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के हाथ में पावर दे दी गई थी. So the British wanted to rectify that. So British ने फिर से decentralization शुरू कर दिया. अलग अलग प्रोविंसेस में अब उन्हें फिर से पावर दे दी गई अपने लॉज बनाने की. इसके अलावा अलग अलग नए प्रोविंसेस भी सेटअप हुए. फॉर एग्जांपल लेजिस्लेटिव काउंसिल बन गई बंगाल में अलग से, नॉर्थ वेस्ट फ्रंटियर प्रोविंस में, पंजाब में. ऑल ऑफ दीज वर गिवन देयर ओन लेजिस्लेटिव काउंसिल कि आपकी खुद की लेजिस्लेटिव काउंसिल है, आप अपने लॉज खुद बना सकते हैं. सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट सबके लिए लॉ नहीं बनाएगी. However, now this is very important. Remember, 1861 Act के हिसाब से there was no distinction between central and provincial subjects. जो आज के टाइम पे you have the 7th schedule in the Indian Constitution. You all know 7th schedule which has 3 lists: the union list, state list and concurrent list. कि कौन किस पर law बनाएगा. This division was not there in the 1861 Act. 1861 के टाइम पे कोई डिवीजन नहीं था कि सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट विल मेक लॉज ऑन दिस एंड द स्टेट गवर्नमेंट विल मेक लॉज ऑन दिस. देयर वाज नो डिवीजन एज सच. देन The Governor General was also given the power to promulgate ordinances. अगर कोई इमरजेंसी है, during an emergency, he can make or he can bring ordinances without asking the council, legislative council or the executive council. Then we move on to the Indian Council Act of 1892. It came at a very important point. Just 7 years before this act, a historic movement took place in India, which was the formation of the Indian National Congress in 1885 by A.O. Hume and many other Indians. The formation of Indian National Congress was a big event. Why? After the Congress came into being, there was now a platform through which constant demands were made by Indians to the British. There were demands that Indians should be included in the decision-making process. Indians should be given a place in the government. Although ये demands ऐसी नहीं थी कि हाय हमें अभी के अभी दो, नहीं. The demands were very peaceful. They were just writing letter. They were just making petitions. They were just praying कि कुछ हो जाए तो अच्छा है. But still there were demands nonetheless. उन demands के चलते from now onward you will see a pattern. अब जो भी act आएगा आप उसमें एक pattern notice करेंगे. The pattern is with every passing act, the number of members in the council will keep on increasing and the number of Indians in the council will also keep on increasing. Although they were not given much powers, but numbers have increased. Now, as a teacher, I would see the easiest thing for a teacher is to tell a student सब कुछ याद कर लो, क्योंकि सब कुछ याद कर लो तो मेरी जिम्मेदारी खत्म हो जाती है because I know कुछ ना कुछ तो आ ही जाएगा. But I know it is not easy to remember numbers, especially in this case. So as a teacher, I would advise you not to focus on the numbers as in how many members were there in the council in 1892 Act, 1909 में कितने number हो गए, 1919 में कितने number हो गए, because that will become very difficult for you to remember. What I suggest is just remember the trend that 1892 से शुरुआत होकर के number of people would now keep on increasing in the council, number of Indians would also keep on increasing and their power would also gradually improve. So 1892 में the size of the legislative council was increased at the province level also and at the central level also. So in the central legislative council, minimum of 10 members had to be appointed and maximum of 16 members. In the provinces also, there were a lot of members who were appointed, but there were hardly any Indians. There were hardly any Indians who were appointed here, and even those who were appointed were the people who were not representing the common people of India. They were much close to the British. The power of the legislative council was increased slightly. That is, the members were now allowed to discuss the budget but did not have any right to vote and they could not ask any supplementary question. Now, this is a point which you must remember because this is asked in the prelims. In 1892 Act, they could discuss the budget but they could not vote on it and they could not ask any supplementary questions. Although, as I said, the representation given to Indians was just in the name, but nonetheless, at least there was a provision that Indians may be in the council, in the legislative council, and the number of members, number of Indians in the legislative council was increasing very gradually. Thus, 1892 can be said as the first step, the very first step of having representative government in India. Representative government as in the Indians would be running the government. The Indians that were chosen were not through any direct election. There were no direct elections that were happening. These were just indirect elections. Indirect elections as in the people who were already in power in district boards and all kind of government bodies. They were the ones who selected Indians in the council. The common man did not have any right to vote. Then we come to one of the most important acts from the examination point of view and from the Indian history point of view also. That is the Indian Council Act of 1909, also famously called the Minto Morley Reforms. Minto at that time was a Viceroy of India, Lord Minto, and Morley at that time was a Secretary of State for India. As I said earlier, these positions were established by the 1858 Act. Now, a lot of things were happening just before this Act. Partition of Bengal had taken place by Lord Curzon in 1905, so people were very unhappy. They were agitating, they were demanding a lot of things. Also, the Muslim League, not the Muslim League, but a group of Muslim leaders had become very active at that time. They had gone to Shimla in 1906 to meet Lord Minto, who was a viceroy, and they demanded to have a separate electorate for the Muslims. Separate electorate means only Muslims will vote for the Muslims and non-Muslims cannot take part in the seat which is reserved for the Muslims. G.K. Gokhale, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, who was a political guru of Mahatma Gandhi, he also went to England to emphasize and to talk to the people, talk to MPs in England that there is a need to have reforms in India or there can be a revolt very, very soon because people are now not happy. That was a time when the Indian Council Act of 1909 was passed to settle down the Indians, those who were demanding reforms, to placate their demands, to tell the moderates that we are listening to you, although we are not accepting all your demands, but some of the demands were accepted. Now, as I said, starting from 1892, in all these acts, one thing will be common, which is that the expansion of the Legislative Council will take place both at the center and at the province level. This is what I said to you earlier. At both the levels, with every passing act, the number of people will increase, the number of Indians will also increase, and their powers will also increase. You don't need to remember the numbers. Now, the Legislative Council at the center now would have 60 members instead of 16. If you remember, in the last act we read, Legislative Council had 10 to 16 members. Now this 60 was improved to 60. At the provincial level also, now the number of members would increase. Now there were two types of members in these councils, remember. There were the official members. Official members means the members who were actually part of the British company, who were representing the British East India Company, and there were non-official members in the council. Non-official members means those members who did not work for the company, who came from outside. So, official majority in the Central Legislative Council was still retained, means out of these 60 members, majority of the members in the Central Legislative Council have to be official members, those who worked for the company only. But at the province level, now this is very important, at the province level, states के level पे, non-official people could be in the majority. So 1909 से official लोगों की majority was maintained at the central level, but at the provinces the non-officials were allowed to come into majority. Then communal representation, very, very important. As I said earlier, also a group of Muslim leaders met Lord Minto in Shimla in 1906, demanded separate electorate for Muslims. This was accepted. For the first time ever, the seats in legislative bodies were reserved on the basis of religion for Muslims, and those seats which are reserved for Muslims, only Muslims could vote on those seats. So there was separate electorate. And why did the British accept it? Because they liked the policy of divide and rule. They wanted to divide the population on the basis of religion, and they happily accepted this idea of having a separate electorate for the Muslims. Then the members were given certain more powers. Now the members were given the power to move resolutions on the budget before it was finally approved. Also, they were given the right to ask supplementary questions now. Very, very important. We just discussed in the 1892 Act that members could discuss the budget but could not ask supplementary questions. In the 1909 Act, however, now they were allowed to ask supplementary questions as well. Then one of the most important things that happened was Lord Minto appointed the first Indian in the Viceroy's Executive Council, that is Satyendra Sinha. Very, very, very important. Now don't be confused. There are many students who get confused. Say, अरे सर 3 Indians को पहले ही appoint कर दिया गया था, हमने पढ़ा था 1861 में. नहीं. The 3 Indians that were appointed in 1861 were in the Legislative Council. So Legislative Council में Indians were added much earlier. In 1861, 3 Indians were added. But in the Executive Council of the Viceroy, means the Council of Ministers, जैसे आप समझ सकते हैं. In the Executive Council, the first Indian that was added was in 1909 only, and he was Satyendra Sinha. Remember this name. He was the first person or first Indian to be added in the Viceroy's Executive Council. That was done through 1909. Now, I have two very important questions for you, questions that have been asked by UPSC in the previous year from these acts. First question is on your screen. Read the question carefully. Take 10 seconds or so to answer this very, very simple question. Which of these following acts was also called Act for Good Government of India? The hint is it came right after the revolt because British wanted to show that we care for you and we will bring good government to India. So yes, it was a Government of India Act 1858, which was also called as the Act for the Good Government of India. Very easy, straightforward question. Most of you should be able to answer this. Then the second question. If you have seen the video carefully, you should be able to answer it very easily. Else, it might be slightly tricky for you. It's about the Morley Minto Reform, that is a 1909 Act. Read it carefully, take your 10, 15, 20 seconds and see. First, in the provincial legislature councils, non-official majority now took place or happened. Discussion on the budget, including supplementary questions, was allowed for the first time. Muslims were given separate electorate. We have just read all these three are correct. We have read that in the central legislature, still officials were in the majority, but in the provincial legislature, non-officials were now in the majority. Secondly, we also read that people were now given the right to ask supplementary questions in the 1892 Act. They did not have the right to ask supplementary questions, and Muslims were given a separate electorate. So the answer here is D. All of them are correct. Just to remind you, EduRev Infinity is a platform which has more than 10,000 questions prepared specially by the UPSC experts, people who have cleared the examination, and they have prepared these questions specially for you so that you get an idea of what are the kind of questions that can be asked and you can prepare at the optimum level. Thank you for watching this video.